Hello, and welcome to Healthy Kingston, a health promotion and wellness program of the Kingston Board of Health. I'm your host, Janet Wade. I'd like to make one important announcement. The health department has a public health nurse who's available to speak with residents about maneuvering the healthcare system. As we all know, it can be very daunting. What she can help you with is accessing healthcare services, instructing you on how to interact with your physician, and clarifying medical treatments and procedures. If you would like further information or to schedule an appointment with her, please call the health department at 781-831-6006. We are in the month of April, and we've been celebrating Earth Day, which is leading us to discuss what we as residents of Kingston and planet Earth can do to make our town as environmentally safe and healthy as possible, not only for our families, our friends, and our neighbors, but also for future generations. With that, I would like to introduce a local community activist, Jean Naumann, who's the chairman of the Kingston Recycling Committee and a member of the Kingston Agricultural Commission. Hello, Jean, welcome.
Thank you, Janet. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about recycling.
Absolutely. It's always nice to have you here. So if you would, can you tell us about the different programs that are available in town all of us should be taking a part in helping the environment?
I'd be happy to. First, let me just say that recycling is not easy. It's not easy to understand. It's not easy to comply with. The rules change frequently because when we recycle, what we're doing is providing feedstock for future products. And the availability of a manufacturer to do that changes over time. So one day you're told you can recycle one thing, next day you're told we no longer recycle that. And it's all based on the market and what's being reproduced from the material that we recycle.
Interesting. I was not aware of that.
So the best way to find out the most up-to-date information is to use what we call the Recyclopedia. And there is a link to that on the Recycling Committee webpage on the town website. There's many other links on there for people who have questions and want information about different aspects of recycling. We're fortunate in that in 2011, our town reconfigured our recycling and disposal center to really accommodate the residents. It does require that people separate materials, and the bins are very clearly marked as to what goes in those bins. Then that material is taken to a sorting facility and then on to a manufacturer. We find that there's a lot of things in those bins that probably shouldn't be there, and subsequently when they are received at the sorting center, some of that material ends up in the trash, such as black plastic. Black plastic is at the end of its life. You can't do anything further with black plastic. And we're hoping to encourage different retailers and restaurants who continue to use black plastic containers to discontinue those.
Can you just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but for those of us who are taking recycling materials there, what is the best way to bring them? Like rinsing out plastics, compiling, cardboard, any suggestions for any of that?
Sure. It's best if the bottles and cans are nice and clean. That doesn't mean they have to go through the dishwasher, but they do need to be rinsed out. The cardboard, yes, if you'll notice, the slot to put it in is very narrow, and that's intentional, so that people do break down the cardboard. It's much easier for it to go into the compactor if it's broken down. I did want to talk a little bit about the plastic bag ban that went into effect about a year ago. Again, this was an effort to reduce the amount of plastic that's going into our environment. I'm sure people have seen many articles in the last year or so saying that it's a waste of time to do this, it's a waste of time to recycle because the majority of the plastic doesn't get recycled. And I have a little bit of a concern about that because I think people are being misled. Much of the plastic is being reused that you put in your recycling bin. Some of these reports cover all types of plastic, not just what we as residents deal with, but what the manufacturers do. And it goes back to the early existence of plastic containers. And we do know that in the beginning, people were not recycling as much as they are now. So I think you have to look carefully at any article you read about recycling, see who's sponsoring it, to see what their angle might be and what they're saying about plastics. Keep in mind that plastics come from petroleum. And there's a very heavy push from the petroleum industry to maintain a large volume of plastic because it's a big moneymaker for them. So anytime we try to push back on the amount of plastic, whether it's what's surrounding something that you buy, you go in and buy a little battery and it's in this huge plastic case. We're trying very hard to get bills passed that will require the manufacturers to reduce the amount of plastic and packaging and also pay for the recycling of the material. Because right now, the residents of every community are paying for all the recycling of materials. So the plastic bag ban seems to have gone through very smoothly. In an effort to support that, the Recycling Committee used grant money to provide people with stickers to the Recycling and Disposal Center with a reusable shopping bag, because now that's what you need to be using when you go to the grocery store.
Right.
We don't want people taking the paper bags. Paper bag production is a whole other nasty little industry because we're cutting down trees and we're also using a lot of water and chemicals to process the paper. So paper is not a panacea either. The real key is to find sturdy, reusable bags and use those every time when you go shopping. We also started about a year ago an organic collection, and this requires the resident to simply remove all the organic material from their trash, put it aside, and then bring it to the transfer station. And as you go around through all the recycling bins and you come around to where people can dump their yard waste, you'll see some green bins in a wooden corral with a big green sign for you to dump your organic material. And why are we doing this? Well, first of all, organic material is very heavy, and it constitutes almost 40% of the trash that we throw out. It's also very smelly, and it can go back into the earth and not create any additional pollution. We're also not dragging it down to CMAS to be incinerated. It costs the town nearly $90 a ton to dispose of material at CMAS. Why are we sending 40% down there that can simply be recycled? And our material is picked up on a weekly basis. It's taken to a farm and it's composted. So we're returning organic material to the earth where it really belongs. I know people have been asking about the swap shop. We had a swap shop up until the pandemic, and then the state ordered all of them closed. When we went to reopen it, we found there had been infiltration by water as well as mice, and so it was no longer usable. So we're in the process of, we just applied for a grant that would help us pay for a new swap shop, and we're in the process of looking at various vendors to see what just might be appropriate. The swap shop will not reopen until we have sufficient volunteers, because what we found is that people were not reading all of the signs that we had up saying what could be put in the place and what couldn't. So we're now going to have a volunteer at the door helping people understand what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. Okay. I did want to mention that we have a hazardous household waste collection coming up June 8th. We're sharing this with Duxbury, and it will actually take place in Duxbury. If you want to register for that event, you need to go on the South Shore Recycling Cooperative website. Then you can register, and you can select a time when you want to drop off your material. This year, we're working with the green teams in the schools. There's a designated individual in each school that helps with recycling education and activities, and we're there to support them. We're also going to be working with the Kingston Public Library this summer. The statewide reading focus is going to be on recycling and conservation. And we're really pleased to hear that there's going to be a focus on that for the summer reading programs at the library. We also want to emphasize that textiles can no longer go in the trash. There's several options for individuals to drop off textiles either at the recycling and disposal center or at the schools. That material, there's a wide range of material that they will accept, including shoes and purses and belts and clothing and household linens. That material is then sorted through. Things that are reusable are sent in one direction. Things that need to be taken apart and the material in there reused goes another direction. And you'll find that in a lot of the wipers, wiping cloths that you can buy, or stuffing for furniture. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that all of those textiles can be repurposed. And the state has mandated that they cannot go in the trash anymore. One last item is on lithium-ion batteries. Mm-hmm. I'm sure people have heard or seen news articles where these batteries create a fire, whether it's in a laptop or in a vape pen or in a phone. So we do know that they're very dangerous. They cannot go in the regular trash. There's a special bin at the transfer station where those batteries can go, and they have to be handled appropriately. The fire department brought in a training session for their staff as well as the highway department staff that manages the recycling center on just how to handle this material. So they're very dangerous, and anything that might have that battery in it, you cannot put it in the trash.
Wow, this is wonderful. A lot more information I've become aware of, I didn't realize. So basically the takeaways are if everyone can recycle, if they can compost as much as possible, don't use paper bags, use your own bags at home and take them to the grocery store. I keep them in my car, so I'll remember. And also to take advantage, be on the lookout for the swap shop that's coming, and really take advantage of going through your house and seeing what you can bring to the recycling center. Mm-hmm. Lithium batteries, probably paint, anything that you have that you probably need to get rid of, but do it in a proper way that won't damage the environment.
Right. And again, if there's any questions about it, I would urge you to look through the Recyclopedia app that's available on the town website, or you can contact any of us from the recycling committee. We'd be more than happy to try and answer your questions or get those answers for you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, and thank you for all your good work you do for the community. It's much appreciated.
Thank you. I think it's well worth my time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. April is National Poetry Month. Does poetry have anything to do with health? Actually, recent studies have shown that reading, writing, and sharing poetry can help people cope with loneliness or isolation and reduce feelings of anxiety and depression. For people who are ill, poetry provides a space to vent, to reflect, and to come to terms with their particular situation. It provides an organization and a structure with which to tackle different perceptions or feelings that you might have, and in particularly dealing with negative thoughts. Healing can take place at a pace that's determined by the person who's actually writing the poetry. Whether it's coping with pain, dealing with a stressful situation, or coming to terms with uncertainty, poetry can benefit a person's well-being, confidence, emotional stability, and quality of life. It also allows all of us a way to be heard and represent our particular feelings and our wishes in any given situation. I've asked a local expert to tell us about poetry and how to create it. Kingston resident Bill Alberti is a poet, artist, and musician. He holds degrees from Stonehill College and Bridgewater State University, and he is a retired English teacher in the Hingham school system. He's written 3 books of his own poetry, and he has published extensively in local journals and newspapers. So, Bill, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, my
really
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Happy National Poetry Month.
Thank you. Thank you. So, tell us, what is poetry? What is your definition?
Well, as Ben Jonson said, if you try to define poetry, it's like trying to define light or love. It's different for everyone. But for me, poetry, I'll have to confess that I didn't get into poetry till I was about 19 or 20. And it was because I found some of the modern poets, people that I could relate to who were accessible. And I think that's an important part for someone starting in poetry, is to read those people that are accessible to them. In school, we were taught the Romantic poets, and we were analyzing rhyme schemes and meter, and it kind of was an era that had different historical references, different vocabulary, and it just made it more of a labor than an enjoyment.
Yeah. I know you told me there are like 30 different types of poetry, which I found very interesting. But what would you say are the most common ones that we all think of?
Well, poetry really can come down to 3. One is narrative poetry, those poems that tell a story or relate an incident or list things. The second would be lyrical poetry, which is what we always think about. Poetry that has rhyme, might have rhythm. I mean, it should have rhythm. All poems should have rhythm. And rhyme is necessary or not necessary. It's just another technique that can be used. And the lyrical poetry is expressing what's in your mind, your feelings. It can be very cathartic.
Well, and obviously, particularly if you have a health issue or loneliness, a depression, an emotional issue, as I spoke to earlier, how do you even start to write poetry? Do you need training to do this?
No, not necessarily. To write poetry, you don't need training. I think of it as if you want to play the piano, you have to look at the long range. Do you want to be playing at Symphony Hall? Then you have to take classical piano lessons, and you have to study it, and you have to study music theory. You have to really get into it. If you want to just play piano for fun for yourself, or maybe to play a song at a party, you learn the chord method, and you're having some fun and relaxing with it. I think your approach to poetry can be looking at, do I want to just express myself and maybe share some poems with friends and family? Or do I want to, eventually become a poetry teacher? In which case you'd have to go in depth in studying poetry more. But you mentioned forms, and I think for someone's beginning poetry, I think of like when you go to the Fine Arts Museum, you might see art students sitting there copying the masters to try and learn the techniques. And it's the same thing with poetry. I think it's very important that you read poetry, read a wide range of poetry, many different poets. Some of the modern poets, some of the older poets, and you'll see that poetry can be about anything, and there are many different ways of approaching poetry. And I think you absorb that, and then you try your hand at writing some poetry. And there are forms. I mean, you can look up different forms. There's at least 30 different forms: concrete poems, haiku, cinquain, sonnets, villanelles. There's 30 different forms, and they give you like a recipe on how to try and put your thoughts on paper according to a form. So it was a good way to experiment with it until you find your own voice. It's important to find your own voice. And I think that's part of finding your own rhythm or meter. I think poetry is like is a heartbeat. Our heartbeats have a rhythm. And when we're walking, we walk to a certain rhythm. And I think when you get into writing poetry, you start to develop your own rhythm.
That's a wonderful way to look at it. For those of us, and I know I speak for many people that are intimidated by poetry and think it's a writing form that we may not be able to do. I like the fact that you mentioned looking at what you're really trying to accomplish and looking at the long term, and also reading poetry to give you a basis on which to start your own writing. I think those are excellent tips. How do you find poetry as a means of self-expression? Can you talk about
Well,
that a bit?
we live in a society now that is very manic. I mean, we have television, we have media, our lives we have struggles and things that we're constantly trying to do. We're very, very busy. And you know now that there's a focus. You mentioned the health benefits of poetry. We know about yoga now. We know about meditation. How important it is to get away from these pressures that we have and to really just get to a point where we relax in the silence and do our own self-reflection. And I think reading poetry allows you to do that, and writing poetry allows you to do that, plus expressing yourself.
Right.
And then sharing your poetry. I mean, we all share the same humanity. So we all have our struggles, we have our tragedies, we have our joys, and being able to realize that you're not alone, that we all share this same human condition. And by expressing yourself in poetry and by reading other people's poetry, you become more aware of that.
Excellent points. Well, with that, I'd be very interested in hearing some of your poems. I've asked you to share them. And if you could, before you get into that, and certainly mimic it in your reading, how to read a poem. Is there any particular way?
In the world, there's only two kinds of writing. You have a choice. You either write prose or you write poetry, telling us that they're very different. Prose is a huge set that has all these subsets: a letter to your grandmother. If you write a novel, you write a short story. If you write in a diary, you write an article for a newspaper, you write, the great novel. Poetry has a lot of rules: punctuation, capitalization, paragraphing, spelling. I write poetry, I write prose as well. And I know, and we know there's the differences. Poetry is different. Poetry is the condensing language, looking at the beauty of language. And because you're condensing it, you have to be more careful with the words that you're choosing, so that you're creating the beautiful language that exists. It's much smaller than prose itself.
Oh, that makes sense.
So to write a poem, I thought this would be a good example. This was a poem I wrote just the other day. So when you're thinking of poetry, you're blocking out the rest of the world and you're concentrating on something. And you're looking at your own attitude and your own thoughts about it. So I found, in my backyard, I found an empty bird's nest. And I went in and I started thinking about it, looking at it carefully, and I wrote this short poem. Empty nest. On the lawn, beneath the hemlock tree, I found a nest. No bird, no egg, just a clever circle of sticks and strings and bits of paper, patiently, painstakingly entwined. A hollow hatching, a pocket of protection where life began. So in that poem, it's the epiphany that I have that this is where a life began. This is the beautiful work of the bird creating this nest. Just hit me.
Well, and I can picture it. You can really picture it when you're saying, yeah. And I can see the condensing of the words. It's very powerful.
As I said, poetry can be cathartic as well. I think I'd read this one. It talks a little bit about music and poetry and sometimes art are bedfellows. So this poem I had written because I play guitar, but it also expresses your feelings about how you feel about poetry. It's called Gone Away. When I strum my guitar and sing, I'm not present. Though you may see and hear me, I'm gone. Just look into my eyes. I'm somewhere else. Transported to a place between thoughts where wonder meets peace, where grace and joy reside. To a place where melody inspires not only the swelling of tears, but the soothing of the broken soul and the healing of the hurting heart.
It's beautiful, absolutely
So
beautiful.
I think, when you're writing a poem, you're getting into your own head, your own theory, you're trying to express, very important if you write a poem, to express what's in your heart about the subject that you're writing. What's your attitude about it?
Very nice. Well, thank you very much for all the information that you've given us. I've certainly learned a lot more about poetry, its meaning, how we can further express ourselves through it. Keeping in mind if you are dealing with some type of pain, isolation, and this can be, physical or emotional pain, that it would behoove you to sit down with paper and pen and put your thoughts on paper. And it's also a wonderful way to not only have that catharsis, as you were saying, but express internally what's going on with you so people have a greater understanding of what you're going through. Thank you so much.
If I could give you an example of a poem on that.
Sure.
So my father was a big World War II hero. He had 3 Purple Hearts and a Bronze Star, and he had lost his hearing because of the war. And I went to his funeral in Florida, and on the plane ride home, I wrote this poem about him, which expresses that relief, that cathartic feeling that you get.
Sure.
It's a short poem. It's called Losing Battle. It will be hard to choke back tears, and the time is far off when I will forget this day. His suits still fill the closet, each with a war-shortened sleeve. His hearing aids lie silenced on the bedstand, beneath the wall-framed Purple Hearts. I am too tired to comprehend all that has transpired. Even if stockpiled to the ceiling, no medicine could have stalled cancer's blitzkrieg. It is now my heart that has been stabbed by the bayonets of sorrow, riddled with the bullets of grief. So in this, I express, my own trying to deal with the death of my father, who was this war hero, and that I have to express how I feel at this moment, and eventually, of course, I'll probably sort it out to some extent.
Absolutely beautiful. I've always admired your ability to go deeper, go to a different level, and truly express what's in your heart. And again, as you mentioned, it's a good thing not only for people going through emotional distress, healing of some sort, but also for those who are caretakers, for people who are in that type of a situation, going through a difficult time in dealing with someone who might have Alzheimer's, whatever it might be, and expressing their feelings. So I can't thank you enough. This has been very revealing, and I hope our audience takes this to heart and thinks about the potential for poetry in their lives and that of their loved ones and those for whom they might be taking care during a difficult time. And also, again, a wrap-up, keep in mind, if you're having issues maneuvering the healthcare system, please call the health department at 781-831-6006 to schedule an appointment with the public health nurse who may be able to help you get through the system. And again, Earth Day during April, that it's important for all of us, for our community and for generations to come, to recycle, use our own bags when we go to the grocery or go shopping, compost, and look out for that swap shop that's going to be coming in the future. So with that, stay safe and healthy. Thank you.